Welcome to the J&J Show. I'm Jeff, he's Jerry, and tonight we have a pretty interesting topic that we're going to present to you. You notice in the bottom right-hand corner it says just two guys talking Christianity and more. Tonight we're definitely going to be getting into the and more portion of some of the stuff we wanted to talk about on this channel. And I guess I'm just going to go ahead and say it. We're going to be talking about cryptids tonight. Cryptids. Before you click off and just completely dismiss us, what if we told you that we can link Bigfoot back to the Nephilim, and we can connect everything to the Bible, and we can connect these things to the enemy? Because there is a link there. There is a link, and I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to Jerry so he can get us started here, because he is much more knowledgeable about this topic than I am. So I'll probably be taking a back seat and asking a lot of questions. Hopefully, some questions that that you yourselves have. And you know, if we don't hit any questions or topics on this matter that you are interested in, feel free to email us. I'll include the email in the description below. Send us your questions, send us your encounters, send us anything. And if you want, we could talk about it on air. We could possibly have you come on air. Or if you want to keep it private, we can just email back and forth. But now I'm going to turn it over to Jerry, because he's going to get us rolling into this topic.
Well, it's I thought that the previous videos we had done would be a challenge, but this actually, we've been hinting around for over a month, right from the beginning, actually, that we were going to be getting into some pretty challenging stuff. And most people automatically assume that we probably meant, the book of Ezekiel or Revelations or something that's very, challenging. And we have done some of the prophecy. However, one of the reasons why we have several different purposes for doing this channel. First and foremost is to get people to get closer to the Lord. But also, we wanted to try to help people realize and be aware that there is much more to this world than what science necessarily allows for. And I'm not against science. I think that science has given us great medicine, great inventions, good and bad. I am, however, against this movement that's going nowadays that where science is God. And people manage to change their God science into whatever is politically expedient for them at the time. And so this is going to be several parts. There will probably be folks, like Jeff said, who probably will turn off right off the bat. However, we're hoping that you not, especially Christians, because there's always been a divide. I remember when I first started wondering about some of these mysteries and whatnot, I thought it was mighty interesting why it is that whenever I looked into these mysteries of the world, I had to be on the other side of the wall from my Christian faith. It was almost like we had a Berlin Wall that ran right down the middle and divided the Christian faith and mysteries on the earth. And as a young Christian who was pretty enthusiastic, I didn't really understand that, because the way I saw the world, and I still today, I bring my Christian faith to everything. There isn't an issue that I say, well, there's no room for Jesus in this subject whatsoever. I apply it to everything, especially something that's mysterious as the world. Now, a lot of people are saying, well, boy, you just, started throwing out cryptids. And what is a cryptid? A cryptid is just a term for an unknown being, something that's not recognized by science, but is reported at a large scale around the world. And there can be any number of different beings that are reported. But really what I want to start off by pointing out, and we've already talked about this a little bit in some previous episodes, and that is that like Jeff said, we're linking this to what is described in the Bible as going on in the time of Noah. And that's critical, because the Bible never gets too terribly far away from that. Even it comes back around in Peter, the last book before Revelation, Jude talks about it quite a bit. And the Garden of Eden was a big deal, but the Garden of Eden was followed up by another rebellion. And that was the rebellion of the 200 watcher angels that the book of Enoch tells us came down onto Mount Hermon. and they made a pact with themselves that they were going to abandon their estate, their position that God had given them, and they were going to take human wives and live as kings, live as lords over men in the earth. And that's what the book of Enoch says. Now you might say, well, the book of Enoch, I haven't seen, where is that? Is that between Genesis and Exodus? Actually, the book of Enoch is not in the Bible. So it's what we consider what's referred to as apocryphal book or extra biblical. So it cannot be treated as scripture. However, Enoch is unique amongst the apocryphal books because it is one of the only ones, there may be another one in there somewhere that's referenced, but it's one of the very few that the Bible actually quotes from. And the Bible actually takes, and it's in the book of Jude, where it talks about the Lord coming with many thousands of his holy ones to execute judgment against those who rebelled against God. And we know that Jude was taking directly from the book of Enoch with that verse. And so the fact that the Bible quotes from the book of Enoch tells us that while we don't consider it inspired scripture, it does tell us that this is, the information therein is reliable. And we don't treat it the way we would treat the book of Acts or the book of Romans, but we can look back, and especially since it fills in so many areas. It was part of the Dead Sea Scrolls. The book got a lot of validity when it was discovered as part of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And in the past, I would say 30 or 40 years, a lot of people have really taken Enoch and really kind of done a dive into what it was talking about, because it's filled in so many areas that we just didn't know about. For example, like we've talked about before on this channel, demons. I'm not going to talk about demons, but this is where the book of Enoch has given us great insight. We didn't know, we weren't really sure where demons came from. Unclean spirits, foul spirits, as the Bible refers to them. Why would God make a demon? That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Young Christians a lot of times will ask these questions, and what do most Christians do when they're asked this? They shrug and, well, I don't know. Well, the book of Enoch tells us that the demons are the disembodied spirits of the giants who were killed. And again, it's like Steve Ishtal on his channel talks about, if all this stuff offends you and you're just get mad and get upset, then this obviously isn't the channel for you. But the fact that giants existed, the Bible makes it abundantly clear. It goes in and describes in great detail how tall they were. It gives us the size of their weapons, and these giants were half human and half angelic. They were an unclean thing because they had not been, they were not made in God's image. And so part of his charter, as David went into the promised land, and reason why this helps to understand is a lot of non-Christians even today try to slander the Bible and God by calling God a mass murderer, because in some of the verses where they go into the promised land, the Lord commands them to kill every man, woman, and child. And even the animals. And non-Christians and atheists see that and they say, well, see, he's a bloodthirsty, angry God. What you have to understand is that those tribes they were going after, were Nephilim tribes, Nephilim being the term for the Hebrews used for giant, and their offspring. And we've talked about this a little bit before, but the reason why the flood came wasn't just because everybody was bad. They were bad. But the problem that was going on at the time with the world was that this reproduction had been going on. The giants, the book of Enoch and other books tell us that the giants had become extremely violent. They practiced cannibalism. They devoured the land in terms of the inhabitants of the land. They were exceedingly wicked. A lot of the Baal worship and the idolatry that the Amorites practiced, the Amorites being a race of giants that were after Noah's flood, a lot of the just awful child sacrifice and other terrible practices that these people pursued, they got from the giants. Many of these giants that were still around after the flood. Now you might ask, well, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but you might ask, well, how were there giants after the flood? If the flood was designed to kill the giants, the answer to that is we don't know for sure how there were. There's different theories as to why giants were still on the earth, because the book of Genesis says there were giants on the earth in those days, referring to the days of Noah, and also after that. And so after that was after the days of Noah. And we know because we have Og, and there was Goliath, and there were others, the Egyptian that it talks about, who was massive in height, and the book of Amos, the Lord talks about the Amorites who were as tall as cedar trees. And so you're quite certain at this point in time, there was an attempt to try to portray the giants, or the sons of God, as the Bible refers to the angels, as simply the offspring of Seth for a while, Seth being one of Adam's children. But it just doesn't, it's a very, very weak argument that has all kinds of holes, but I really didn't want to get too much into that. The main thing is that the giants were extremely real. As a matter of fact, there have been some amazing discoveries just this year that have taken place. There was one that was in North Africa, where these giants had fled the promised land as David and the Israelites came in, especially Jericho and some of these other battles that were going on, scared these people. They saw what was happening, and they basically fled. And the theory is, and it's just a theory, that they made their way eventually to North America because of the vast amount of evidence for giants on the continent of North America. It's so much that even we have quotes from Abraham Lincoln talking about the giants in the old world of North America. And there is an extremely good, getting back real quick to the discovery that I just referenced, they actually found Amorite or Phoenician. It was a monolith. It was an upright rock where they had inscribed on it that basically it was put up by the people who had fled, and they had a nasty term for Joshua, son of Nun, basically the Joshua who led the conquest of the promised land. And this rock was inscribed by these Amorites, or maybe they were Phoenicians, same difference, that they had fled from him. And that here we have an actual artifact talking about the fact that these people were fleeing. And also in the Bible, Rahab the harlot, if you remember, when the spies went into Jericho, they were assisted by Rahab the harlot. And she actually tells the spies, the fear of you people has come upon the entire land, and those that remain are seized with great trembling. Well, when that implies that there were those who had fled. If you talk about people who have remained, that implies that many have fled. And there's also a tremendous amount of evidence that was discovered, mostly pre-evolution. The Charles Darwin coming on the scene. And like I said, we're just hitting kind of main points right now. But when Charles Darwin came on the scene, a lot of the discoveries and whatnot were kind of swept under the rug because evolution became the mantra of science, and nothing that stood against evolution was going to be allowed to stand. But before that took place, there was all kinds of evidence discovered throughout Europe of giants, even in relation to the founding of the city of London by two giants, and the Stonehenge are created by giants. And the thought is that they basically made their way over through Newfoundland and came down. A lot of American Indians, when they were asked about these mounds, which are all over America, people in Ohio and Indiana and Illinois and Kentucky, they know about the mounds. People in Virginia, we don't really know much about these huge mounds that exist out there. And when the Europeans came into America, they asked the Indians, well, why did you guys build these big mounds? And the Indians responded, we didn't build them. The people that were here before us built them. And Other tribes talked about how there had been a race of Caucasian, red-haired Caucasian giants that had come in from the east, not from the west, but from the east, from the New England area, and made war against them. Many of the Indians have nothing but negative comments in regards to these giants. Some of the early explorers that went up the Mississippi, Spanish explorers, talked about seeing giants intermingled in with the population, much as they had been intermingled with the population of Canaan, the Canaanites. Some tribes in the Bible indicates exclusively made up of giants, especially in Genesis, the Zamzumims and the Amims and the Rephaims. These were probably the Amorites. These were tribes that were 100% giant. Then there were other tribes that seemed to have been a mixture, where there were, like for the Philistines, where there were giants that were living amongst them, but most of the people were probably not. And it probably goes into a DNA issue. There's a lot of thought that one of the good theories about how the giants were on the earth after the flood is a DNA. Noah was pure in his generations. The book of Genesis tells us that's why the Lord picked him, because he did not have any of the Nephilim, any of the fallen angel DNA in his system. He was purely 100% human. And so, but it doesn't say that his family was. So his daughter-in-laws, I should say, the theory is the daughter-in-laws may very well, if the sons were pure, the daughter-in-laws probably were not. And what that means is that after the flood, as mankind began to repopulate, then the DNA, the genetics of it would have brought about these giants once again. And they would have been, because it does seem from the description that they're not as big after the flood. Again, this is all just theory. There's other people that think that there was a second incursion of angels, where the angels just said, that's fine to destroy the earth. We can come and do the same thing again. And that's probably a debate for a different episode. But the main reason I bring all this up is to lay a foundation that there was, in the time of Noah and afterward, there was tampering that went on with, and Enoch says this, and so does the book of Jasher and some other ancient Hebrew texts, that it says they sinned against animals and mixed animals. And as you read this, you begin to realize that probably a lot of the Greek mythology was, the stories may have been off, but their ideas for a lot of these creatures were probably based in reality. There were some pretty hideous things, especially before the flood. I imagine a lot of this stuff was exterminated after the flood. But I do believe that the rest of the angels, because it's very important to remember that these 200 angels that sinned were not part of Lucifer's great rebellion. This was a separate issue. These watchers had been sent down to monitor and to assist man, and Jude and 2 Peter says they left their proper place, their proper estate. And as a result, these 200 angels were put in chains, and the Bible says in the abyss. And I think it's very interesting that some of the demons that Jesus confronts in the New Testament, the word that they use when the demons say, it says the demons begged Jesus not to send them into the abyss. And they didn't say hell, they didn't say Tartarus, they said the abyss, which is the place where their fathers had been chained. And this still left, even with those angels chained, this still left a large number of fallen angels that were still very much free and active in the world, and still are to this day. And we have to remember the words of Jesus in reference to the latter days, which we're quite sure we're in right now, when he said that as it was in the days of Noah, so it shall be at the coming of the Son of Man. One of the main things that was going on during the days of Noah was this mixing. They had gone hog wild with making these angels. Apparently felt that they were gods. They actually said to each other, they made a pact. They came down on Mount Hermon in Israel Actually, I believe it's in Syria or Lebanon. I'm getting my geography mixed up, but it's Mount Hermon is right there. May even be in Turkey at this point. It kind of I have to look that up after we get done. It's a big mountain, and it's one that Jesus actually went to quite a bit. The matter of fact, they think that the Mount of Transfiguration may have been on Mount Hermon, but it's they made a pact according to the book of Enoch, because one of the angels, whose name was Azazel, said he was worried that he would commit this act, but then the rest of them would chicken out. Just like, how we have when you're little kids and somebody says, let's make a face in the family picture. And then so you do. And then the person whose idea it was, they don't do it. I know somebody who did that once. And then you're left holding. And this Azazel, apparently that's the way he felt. He's like, I'm going to be left. And then I'm going to. So they all made a pact, 200 of them on Mount Hermon, that they were all going to do this thing. And it caused, it was a big deal. And that dominated. This dominated the 1,000 years or so. I forget. I looked up. It's a lot of time between the Garden of Eden and Noah's flood. It's a lot of time. It's not just a decade. It's hundreds and hundreds of years. It may even be 2,000 years, but it's at least 1,000. I got it written down around here somewhere. And that this was going on. Mankind was evil as a result of this, and it was just after. You had a few that were righteous. You had Methuselah was righteous, and Jared, which was Enoch's father. I believe I got that right too. And so you did have righteous men, but the world for the most part was extremely corrupt. And there's not a whole lot said about the earth at that time other than this. I wish there was a lot more in there about the pre-Noah, the pre-flood time. I personally believe that a lot of these gigantic structures on the earth, like the pyramids and a lot of these pyramids that are in South America and Central America, I believe that a lot of these, even the Sphinx, were pre-flood artifices. These were things that were manufactured before Noah's flood. And and there's good reason to think that these things were not just tombs, but they linked in together to tap into a natural electricity grid that spanned around the earth and provided. So that it's also very possible that the world in Noah's time was not as backward as far as we think. We think of it as being just like the days of the Israelites, where they were happy to have a wheel. But it's very possible they may have been more advanced. They may have had electricity. There have been batteries that have been discovered that have been great mysteries. How did they have in Canaan and other Babylon? They found batteries that they can't really explain, and other tools that were made in a way that don't make sense. So that may very well have been. I'm not saying that's 100% the case, but when you approach this stuff, you have to be very flexible, very open-minded. For example, another thing that I've kind of changed my view on over the years, and I'm not 100% dogmatic on this. These are not salvation issues. So this is not something to where, you yell at somebody, oh, you're going to hell because you don't believe in it. Not at all. These things that we're talking about, basically, at least for right now, are just to try to help fill in, because the more knowledge you have, really the better witness you're going to be able to be, because atheists and others love to stump Christians with questions that Christians can't answer. So being ignorant about a lot of these things is not going to help, because if people see you getting stumped and not having the answers, it's not going to help you in a discussion like this. It just isn't. So knowledge is power. I really do believe that. But and now I've got myself distracted on what I was what I was going to say. Anyhow, I'll shut up for a few minutes. There's so much, that it's difficult to cram it all in. I've left a lot of stuff out. But what did you have, Jeff, that you want to throw in?
Well, I mean, don't feel like you got to get all into one episode. We can definitely do parts and stuff on this, because there's definitely going to be a lot, and I feel like we're going to get a lot of feedback that we're going to want to talk about too. So this is a very, very popular topic, and I'll admit that I'm a skeptic. I'm still skeptical, but when you start making the case, it's a fact that there were giants in biblical days, because it's documented all throughout the Old Testament that there are giants. And when you start making the case that what we have, or what is supposedly there today, Bigfoot is part of this Nephilim. The giants were Nephilim. If you start linking that to today and to what Bigfoot, that makes me want to believe that these things could possibly exist. But at the same time, it's like it almost seems too fantastical, and it's such a taboo topic that people immediately start poking fun of people who believe. They start they they make fun of them. They start ridiculing them, and they shame them into silence. Is what I was trying to
Sure.
get to. They definitely try to shame them into silence. So people don't want to talk about this. But another thing that you kind of touched on is in Revelation. It says that the veil will be lifted, right?
Yeah.
I'm not getting that wrong. The veil will be lifted, and creatures will be unleashed upon the earth. Well, if I know you mentioned in one episode that you believe we're at the sixth seal. Was it the fifth or sixth?
No, we are getting the next. I truly believe, and I believe this more now than even when I said it in that episode, that the next thing that's going to happen is a sixth seal.
The sixth seal. So, who's to say that the veil hasn't been lifted or that it's being lifted? Because there's more and more accounts coming around or coming out from all around the world. It's not just happening in one area. It's not just one state. It just one county in one state. It's all around the world. All these stories come in, and they're all so similar. They all have the same things in common with each other. And one thing is that these things could exist. These things could exist behind the veil, and that for the time that these people see these cryptids, the veil has been lifted, or that they passed through it. So who's to say that the veil isn't already thinning? It hasn't already been lifted, and these things aren't roaming the earth, like it says in Revelation.
Most definitely. I mean, the whole idea of um, of a veil. There is there's so much just in that. There's a gentleman who talked about, and this guy was really into going out, and they did the whole goofy Bigfoot thing, which has given the whole subject really has turned the whole subject into an international joke. To be honest, knocking on trees and whooping in the dark and getting, but one of these guys that did that, he said flat out that they had things before that had reached through almost out of thin air and yanked the ponytail of one of the women in there walking down the trail, and then she turned around, there was nothing there. This kind of stuff happens all the time. There's so much just on what you just said. We could do an entire episode. For example, I think that one of the best things that you mentioned I wanted to address was the whole ridicule. There have been, and we'll get to the whole connection between why people think that these giants that are wandering around in our woods today are a remnant or a relic of the original, because it's not a clean theory. And I have my own part of my own theory, because these beings that are wandering around in our woods are not exactly like Goliath. They don't seem to be as refined, or as they're not leading societies. The giants of old were renowned, is what the Bible's men of renowned. They were the leaders of their societies. They were worshipped as gods. Now they certainly aren't. They're described as smelling bad, as looking bad, almost like oafs, or wandering around out in the woods. But we'll get to that. But the thing you mentioned about the ridicule, because that's key, that is absolutely key to this whole thing, is that there has been an overt attempt to ridicule anyone that claims to have had experiences with these beings. I never have, not to my knowledge. So I'm not somebody who's had direct encounters, I don't think. but I would never dream of ridiculing somebody. And the reason why this is important, a lot of this ridicule stems directly from science. This has been a push on the part of science to try to ridicule because they don't want this being discussed because it goes against evolution. So therefore, it must be ridiculed into non-existence or ridiculed into being a joke or a taboo subject. And the result is that a lot of people have thought that they were losing their minds because they have seen these things and other cryptids, especially some of the other cryptids that are almost as common. People see these things and they have nervous breakdowns. And I know of people who have seen these things within a mile of their house. They went to their house, packed up as much stuff as they could, and left, and never came back. It was that traumatizing. This subject is not a joke. The popular culture has seen to make it a joke. A lot of the Bigfoot community has done as much as science has to turn it into a joke with reality television, and other ridiculous types of approaches. The subject is very, very, very serious. And how serious is it? Well, we have people that are going missing in substantial numbers in our parks and in our wooded areas that are going missing without any sort of explanation whatsoever. And I'm not sitting here saying that it's all remnants of the giants that are out there that are taking people, but there's so much going on. And this is the number one thing. If we do anything in this episode here, what I want to do is get across to people who may be scofftics, if you will. If you're scoffing because you have studied all the information and have found that there isn't any evidence, then that's fine. But most people, 99.9% that scoff, it's because they're not aware of so much that has to do. And a lot of people, I'm convinced, they don't want to know because it's scary. And it's particularly scary when doorknobs start turning on the back door in the middle of the night, or when you have banging on the walls, or when the dog out back is ripped off of his chain and never seen again, or when there's claw marks down the side of the horse that was in the barn, or when you see a large shadow staring in or in your bedroom window at night, or you're out camping like one woman and woke up and a face was literally that close staring right at her. She was so afraid she couldn't even scream. She's never gone camping since then. So go ahead.
I would never go camping again either.
Oh yeah. This is extremely, there's one gentleman that was very big into going out and pursuing these things. And they, as crazy as it sounds, they trapped him in a campground one night. He wasn't even out looking for these things. He was by himself out in the middle of nowhere, just trying to decompress because life was stressful. And these things surrounded him and basically downloaded a bunch of demons into him. He's had a nervous breakdown. He can't stop cursing. He can't stop drinking. He's never been an alcoholic. His life is basically ruined. It's not a joke at all for this guy.
Now, to your point about what you're talking about with the guy and the encounter with the Bigfoot, I remember you sent me. He did an interview with I think they were Bigfoot hunters, weren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. They went out and they sought these things out, which is something you should probably not do, but I remember watching that interview, and that was a tough interview to watch. It was very, very suspenseful. I mean, very nerve-wracking to watch this guy try to explain what happened to him that night, and just the raw emotion. And it was just it was tough to watch. It was really tough to watch. I think we could probably put a link to it in the description below if anybody wants to go check that out. But yeah, that was insane. That was really hard to watch.
He said that they basically told him that they were going to kill him that night.
Yeah. I remember.
And from what he described, the Lord intervened. What can only have been the Lord intervened. And I don't know, this was a couple years ago that this happened. I don't know. I know that the gentleman was in contact with Scott Carpenter, and that's somebody whose name I'll throw out there right off the bat, because Jeff and I are not the only ones. There have been more Christians who have realized that a complete absence of any Christians on these issues is not a good thing, because the public is curious what's going on. How are these things, especially as there's more and more of it that's occurring. And the Scott Carpenter is a gentleman who got into this issue, this whole thing that Jeff and I probably jumped into it a little too quick. We just couldn't hold ourselves back, because we've been holding ourselves back. We knew we were going to do this subject since day one. And there's so much to say. It's in order to get people to stay with us on this and listen to the evidence, it's almost important to kind of get your attention. I think if we were to start out with all the small details, we'd probably lose folks. But when you hear somebody like Jeff's talking about, that is completely and totally destroyed. I mean, this guy was barely able to keep it together to talk about. And it's the link that we'll have. I will tell you, don't listen to it if you have children around, because the guy, his profanity, and it's demonic. I mean, they downloaded demons into this guy, is what they did. And he said he could feel it. The thing put its hand on him, shoved him down in a chair by his campfire, and he could feel it. And so it's, I don't know at this time I sent him an email after I saw the video, talking to him, telling him these things, offering to pray with him. He sent back a nice response saying he was thankful, Bob. He appreciated it, but that's all that I heard from him. But I do know that Scott Carpenter was working with him. And Scott Carpenter is a name I might as well throw out there, because he's the leading Christian that's dealing with the subject of what these beings are and how do we make sense of it. And you can probably tell if you're watching this that Jeff and I aren't approaching this like it's a fun joke of a subject about furry forest friends running around with beef jerky in the woods. It's been portrayed as a joke. It's really not. And Scott Carpenter was one of the first to really become aware of this. He got into the tree knocking and whatnot like everybody else. Because, to be fair, nobody really knew at the time what we were dealing with. It was quite possible that these creatures out there, and like Jeff said, we're not talking about the Pacific Northwest. When I was growing up, we, in the late 80s and 90s, it was strictly the Pacific Northwest and Canada. And we heard some noise about Florida and Louisiana may have had some sightings. And of course, Nepal and Tibet and the Himalayas. And that was it. That was the only place. So we all thought that maybe these were just some large gorillas that were walking on 2 feet. And they even had a scientific name that people thought that these things might be. But it became very clear to people who were going out and pursuing these beings that these are not apes at all. And for one thing, a lot of the visuals, the people that were seeing them were describing what they said didn't look like any sort of ape. They said it looked like a huge man, a gigantic man. And Scott Carpenter was, he was the first to put his camera on because he would go hiking. And he got the feeling that he wasn't seeing anything. And somehow he got the idea to mount his camera, his GoPro, on his shoulder facing backwards. Then he even got a system, and I'm not doing it justice, but it balances the thing to where as he walks, it keeps it steady. And over the course of several years, I have his book. It's extremely good. The pictures that he has gotten of things peering at him from the bushes will give you chills. It's unbelievable, because these beings are smart enough that when somebody's walking forward toward them down a trail, they hide. But they know when it walks past, they can peek out and look. And they didn't realize that his camera was facing backwards and catching them peeking out. And the faces that you see they're not monkey faces. Now, one thing's for sure, they're all different types of faces. For the most part, they look like human faces, but just very strange. And what really got Scott got his attention was that as he was doing this and spending a lot of time out in the Smoky Mountains pursuing these, and he was obsessed with it like everybody else is, we have developed what's called the hitchhiker effect. And this has been most often described with ghost hunters, people who go out searching for ghosts in haunted houses and graveyards and places like that. And Scott had the exact same thing happen to him, where they basically followed him home. And he was doing a lot of this research out in the Smoky Mountains, 15 miles from his house. And next thing he knew, they showed up in his backyard at nighttime. And I don't want to spend the whole episode going into that. It's actually kind of funny. They weren't destructive. They didn't try to kill him or anything like that. But he didn't like it. And he began to realize that it was that he was dealing with something, their abilities, the mind speak, whereas they wanted to, they try to, and they do speak to people quite a bit through mind speak. And this has been something that has been rejected. Nobody's ever talked about this aspect of it because it's too weird. And, let's just keep it to where it's just a bipedal monkey man walking around. And that's weird enough. What happened was the Survivor Man guy from one of the cable channels, he went out. He's very well respected. He was like a very likable guy. He went out to approach this subject because people wanted him to, because he's Survivor Man. He's like an expert on the outdoors. And he went out, and long story short, he got convinced basically that yes, they're out there. And he admitted he had mind speak, that they spoke to him in his mind. And this doesn't surprise me in the least, because it's exactly what Jeff and I have described the Lord, when the Lord speaks to you. What we're dealing with here is the supernatural, and these beings are half in the supernatural and half out of it. They're half in the natural, half in the supernatural. And the reason for that is because that's how they were born. They were born of natural women and supernatural angels. And you can get into all sorts of, well, that can't be. Angels can't do things like that. It's not possible. Well, angels can eat food, and angels could wrestle with Jacob all night long. So we don't know, when an angel leaves their estate and they're no longer a spirit, they take on the body. The Bible tells us that we entertain angels unaware. So they're able to take on human form to do their work. And apparently these took on human form. The angels that went into Sodom and Gomorrah had taken on human form, because the people of the city thought they were men. And so that's the state that these beings were in when they committed this sin and created these monstrosities. Now, something I didn't mention before, that's if you're curious about the giants, here's a 400 pages basically that's done. It's called, of course, it's probably backwards in here, Giants on Record. It's by Jim Vera and Hugh Newman, and I think it's a Brit and a New Englander teamed up. And I want to tell you, you read through this and you won't be doubting about giants. It is 400 pages of pictures, stories, footnoted, and newspaper accounts, pictures of bones, the Smithsonian cover-up, where the Smithsonian was, for decades and decades, the Smithsonian would swoop in whenever some giant bones would be found, over and over and over and over and over again. You read about skulls being found the size of bushel baskets, not this big, I shouldn't do my hands, but bushel basket. And the Smithsonian would come in. They would, people. This is another thing too. It's very important. The people would find the bones. What would they do? They would call the authorities, and they would contact the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian would come in and say, "Thank you very much. We'll take these back for storage." And then eventually, over time, people are like, "Well, where are these bones? They're gone. Nobody's ever seen them." The rumor mill has it that they were taken out on a barge into the Atlantic Ocean and dumped overboard. I don't know if that's true or not. All I know is the Smithsonian doesn't have any giant bones. Now, take that phenomenon and apply it to the Bigfoot issue with the bodies, because the first thing people always come up with, well, how come we don't have a body? Well, for one thing, you have to really realize that to draw down and shoot something that's 10 foot tall, and that's another thing too, is that we're realizing that the size of these beings, when I was in college, it was 6 foot to 8 foot, but as as we've gotten a lot more information, it's clear that they're more like what the Bible described, 8 to 10 foot. And there's a lot of people who aren't willing to pull the trigger on something like that, and so that's why you don't have a whole lot of them being shot. And there have been some that have been shot and killed. They do die. And typically, when these things are killed, what have the people done? What would you think they would do? They would call the police. The police come in. The police inevitably are followed by other government officials that no one knows what department they're with. And this happens over and over again. I can't give you all the times I've read this, even recently. It goes on right now. The people are told that the body will be taken away. They're not to ask any more questions, and if they do, that they'll lose their jobs, and that their lives will be made a living hell, and that they're never to talk about it again. And this happens all the time, to where that's one of the reasons why you don't have any bodies. There is one gentleman we'll talk about probably later on that shot and killed one of these things he didn't have a choice, and he basically a 45 slug to the eye socket is sufficient to kill one, and the thing went down and he said he knew it was dead. This guy was a truck driver actually, and the thing was trying to get into the passenger window as he was going up an on-ramp, and he happened to have this 45 and shot this being, and he said he could see in the rearview mirror as it fell, arms were down. I mean, the first thing that hit the asphalt was the creature's face, so he knew it was dead. And but being in a tractor trailer, he couldn't it wasn't like he was driving a Yugo where he could just spin around. He had to get up on the interstate, go to the next exit, get off, go around, come back down, do the whole thing. By the time he got back, there was just a bloody stain that had been drug off, or like something else had drugged the body off into the woods. And he said he wasn't about to climb down out of his rig and go with a flashlight through the woods trying to see, where the thing had gone. And so that's one of the things before we took our mid-episode break that I was saying, that I really want people, if you have an open mind and just consider the weight of the evidence, then you'll begin to realize over time that it's too much. You have to cross over into a realm of refusal to believe. One of the big things right now, and this is a big deal, it's going on even today, right? I don't mean today as in this decade, but today as in this day, is the whole issue with Steve Ishdahl's show. You had something you want to say? Go ahead.
Yeah. Speaking on the open-mindedness, I'll admit I'm skeptic, but I keep an open mind. It's kind of like when we discussed aliens, 30 years ago, 20 years, even 10 years ago, people were skeptical about aliens, but now the government is releasing footage of these unidentified flying, well, I don't want to say UFOs. They don't call them that anymore because that term has become taboo, kind of like Bigfoot or, anything else associated with the unknown. These unidentified flying crafts that they're releasing footage of. So, while people were once skeptical of aliens, but it's looking more and more like, they're out there. Because we've got these ships. I've been listening to Bob Lazar talk about working in Area 51 on Joe Rogan's podcast. I was listening to that, and that's just
amazing.
That's some wild stuff there. But, it's becoming more and more likely that aliens do exist, that there are other beings in the universe than us. And, people were skeptical about that. People used to get ridiculed into silence about aliens. So, if that is, proven to be true, I mean, nobody's seen aliens, but it's becoming more and more likely that there are aliens out there. I have to keep an open mind about this subject. I'm not going to ridicule anybody who wants to come forward and talk about this. That's why I'm not going to sit here and ridicule you, even though, I'm still a little bit skeptical about it. But at the same time, all this evidence can't be ignored, just like with the aliens. People were once skeptical about them, but, now the government's releasing footage of these flying crafts that can't be explained. They admit that they don't know what they are. So the fact that you can't just simply dismiss, especially when we start linking it to the Nephilim, when we start linking it to the enemy, when we think that, these could be part of the enemy army. You can't just simply dismiss it. It's kind of like when you believe in good and you believe in God and you believe in angels, you also have to believe in the devil. You believe in demons because, Satan is, or yeah, Satan is mentioned in the Bible. Lucifer's mentioned in the Bible. He was real. He's real. His minions are real. So to completely, to believe in God and angels and then just completely dismiss the evil is foolish. If you believe in God and angels and you believe in the good, you have to at least admit that the bad is out there. I believe in the bad. I've had my own experiences with it, that we've talked about before in other episodes. But the fact that you can't just simply dismiss this stuff when there's actual evidence, especially when there's evidence in the Bible that giants existed. And people go out and look for these things, and I would not recommend that. It's kind of like when you get a Ouija board and you start trying to summon demons and you're out there ghost hunting and you're dealing with the occult. You invite that stuff into your life. So the way I look at these cryptids is that I'm not going to go out there looking for them, because it's the same thing with ghosts and demons and stuff. You go out there and you start looking and you start knocking. It's just like God and Jesus, they say, knock, keep knocking, and eventually they will answer. It's the same thing with this stuff. You start knocking, something's going to answer. And if you start knocking on some dark doors, you don't want to find out what's on the other side. So if these things are out there and if they are, part of the enemy's army, you don't want to go looking for these things. But, those are just some of the things I wanted to touch on. All right, we had some technical difficulties there, but we're back. I had just made some points, but I think you were getting ready to talk about Steve Ishtal, and I've been listening to him a lot lately, I think, on your recommendation, and I'll let you get into that, but I do enjoy listening to his channel. So you wanted to...
He's a legend in our time. It's I tell you, a character. He's a... Everyone in my family, knows, we refer to him as by his first name, Steve. Whenever I say Steve, everybody knows what I'm talking about. You think to yourself about legends of our own time. He certainly is one. Unfortunately, he's not saved. He does have a lot of Christian friends, especially in Alabama, and I'm hoping that they're going to pull him over to our side. But really, what's happened with Steve Ishtal, this is about 2 years ago. He had a channel, a hunting channel, Big Game Hunter. He's a world famous big game hunter in British Columbia. He's Canadian. And he had a channel that was very successful, talking about big game hunting mostly moose. And I don't think he went overseas a whole lot, mostly, moose and antelope and whatnot, grizzly bear, some. And a lot of his viewers began to really harass him to come out and share his opinion on the issue of the wild men of the woods. And as much experience as he had out in the woods, surely he would have some input into it. And so he came out and said, yeah, he had in fact had an encounter when he was a teenager while bow hunting. When he was young, he started bow hunting, but he taught himself. He had kind of a hard childhood, sounds like, the divorce situation and a step parent that wasn't too good. And so he was coming back up the trail at dusk one evening. He grew up on Vancouver Island and could see that the thing was standing right there in the trail. And he couldn't make out details because of the silhouette from the light behind it, but he could clearly see this thing staring right at him. And he said, it was traumatizing, but he still kept going hunting, and he'd had other encounters since then. He's had a lot of encounters now, but he does not go out pursuing these things. Matter of fact, his whole MO is that the entire Sasquatch Bigfoot community is a joke, and that they've made a joke out of the whole subject. As much as the government has discredited, these people have actually, and some of them are probably decent enough people, but unfortunately the whole thing of wood knocking and trying to get tracks and whatnot, and going out on reality television and whooping in the dark, it's just made a joke out of it. And so the reason why he came out and basically converted his show into a show where every day, sometimes twice a day, he reads emails that people have sent in of their encounters. And the reason why is because his hero in life growing up was his grandfather, who had been a Canadian bomber crewman in World War II. And he said, here, this man who was his hero would climb into an aluminum shaft and fly over Nazi cities and drop bombs and get shot at. He had that much courage, and yet he was afraid to bring up his Sasquatch encounter in front of his family for fear of being ridiculed. And Steve said that really he could never get past. My grandfather, who's as brave is afraid to bring this up because of what people might say, people who don't know that these things actually do exist. So Steve's main mission his main purpose is to provide a place where people can come free of ridicule and talk about their experiences. And it's very, very therapeutic for a lot of these folks, because many of these people have very traumatizing experiences. Also, Steve, one of his main goals is he makes it very clear, and he's right, that the government obviously is fully aware that these beings exist, that they're out there in the woods, and yet they're keeping everyone in the dark on purpose. And he says that people have a right to know before they go out into the woods that there are 10-foot tall beings out there that may or may not be friendly. And yet the government has chosen to lie to us about it, to make a joke out of it, to consistently deny that and not only that, but people, like I mentioned earlier, people who have had encounters with these things and gone to the government or to park rangers are told to be quiet about it. Park rangers that have had encounters with these things, there have been routinely silenced. Military officers have been told, you didn't see any of that. We have lots and lots of accounts. There's one in particular, a gentleman who was I can't remember if he was a ranger or I think it was a game warden for the state of Wyoming, and was looking for poachers. He was way out in the middle of nowhere with his dog, and these beings, he stumbled into one of their areas, and they threw him against a tree, killed his dog right there, and they didn't kill him, but he ended up in the hospital severely injured. And his superiors told him that bear really messed you up. He said it was no bear. And they told me, yeah, it was a bear. You were attacked by a bear. And if you say otherwise, you will no longer have a job with the government, and we will discredit you. And you may even end up in an insane asylum, because we'll tell everyone that you basically have lost your mind. And so what's he supposed to do? He was the only one there. And this happens over and over and over and over again. People are threatened by government agents that we don't even know what agency they work for. And there's a lot to this. And, like Jeff was saying with Bob Lazar, if you don't know about what he's talking about and a lot of the information, please, people, do not dismiss things that you just don't have information on. A lot of people, it's a human thing, knee jerk. You come up to something, take the 411, the missing 411 phenomenon. When I first heard about that, I did like everybody else. Your natural reaction is to dismiss it. Oh, well, these people are going missing in wild places and remote areas. Well, then clearly they're just getting lost. And everyone has that same reaction until you get the information, you look at the details, and then you realize that the mass of information is so much that it cannot be a coincidence. Now, like you said earlier, Jeff, people typically don't want to invest that much time into any of these subjects. So what you have in society is you have people who have invested the time and have looked and hashed through the available information and the evidence and have been convinced, or people who have not done this but have had their own encounters, so they know. See, I've never seen one of these beings. I've had interactions with demons, so I know they exist. So I have no reason to doubt that there's other forces in Satan's army. But there are people who have seen these beings, so they know full well that they exist. They don't have to be convinced. And then you have other folks that are interested and open-minded. I found a lot of Christians are in this camp. I have to say this, Christians get beat up a lot, But the leadership doesn't really want to talk about it. But your rank and file Christians are very open to these issues that we're talking about and very interested because they're aware of the battle that's going on between good and evil, but they just don't know how to connect the dots. And I think that that's where one of the Brenton Sawin was another Christian along with Scott Carpenter. Brenton Sawin may have been the first, actually. Brenton Sawin, Sawin. He's deceased now. He but his channel, his YouTube channel, he was a Christian and approached all these issues from a Christian perspective and was talking about the Nephilim and linking all that together. And in case anyone is wondering, it's not just a theory anymore. The science actually is on our side on this. The study that was done, the Sasquatch genome study, was a 5-year study done by PhDs and scientists and DNA experts. They ran all the DNA. They did all the studies. They took it to university labs throughout the country, and it proved that these beings, through DNA, do in fact exist. It says on the mother's side, they come from humans, and on the father's side, they come from an unknown entity. And so what you have right there is a perfect description of the Nephilim. They're on the mother's side, they come from humans. On the father's side is unknown, and that's what the study showed. But the scientists refused to accept it. The study, when they found out, a lot of the labs were extremely excited about this. And Scott Carpenter, the Sasquatch genome study, they were very excited because the labs are very excited. They said, "You've discovered an unknown entity. What is this?" And as soon as they were told, well, it's Sasquatch DNA, the labs refused to publish any of it. They basically disposed of all of it and said, "Do not contact us ever again or mention that we're affiliated with this." And so it was a massive cover-up. The science is there. I mean, they call themselves scientists, and yet they refuse. They just don't want the results that is going to discredit evolution. And so, but the results did, and this was not a Christian group by any means. Scott Carpenter's a Christian, but none of the other people in the group were Christians. And the Steve Ishtal, getting back to him, when he started this process, it's been going on for 2 years now. His channel, the facts by how to hunt, whatever it is, you can go on there and find it. It's very easy. He's got lots of millions by now of views. It's massive. It's turned the Bigfoot community, as such as it is, on its head, because now I tell you what it's done, Jeff. Do you remember when Nirvana came out in the early 90s and the effect that it had on rock music? All of a sudden, when Nirvana hit the scene, all the hair bands lost their credibility because they all of a sudden looked ridiculous. And now we look back on it nostalgically, and but at the time in the early 90s, the hair band Nirvana killed them. They look ridiculous. Steve Ishtal is Nirvana that has just come on the scene, and the Bigfoot community now, with all their squabbling and their politics, not Democrat Republican politics, but their infighting, they look ridiculous. They've been chasing around the same tree in the woods in the dark for all these years and have gotten nowhere. And so what has happened, and this is very important, this is what I was talking about this just today, and it's going to be coming out here in a couple of weeks, because Steve has taken a very no nonsense approach to this. It's not a circus. His show isn't a school play. It's not a baggy pants or whatnot. It's serious stuff here. He has been contacted by scientists, government scientists, who are basically like Bob Lazar. They're whistleblowers, and they've said that it's time, and they're going to basically spill the beans. One of the guys has terminal cancer, so he's like, "Why should I? I'm not worried what they do." So he's basically, these scientists told Steve that, yes, we know the government knows they exist. We know exactly what they are, and from what he's gathering all the information now to release it all at one time. YouTube may block it. We don't know. Steve has already come out and said that if he's accused of being a child molester or committing suicide, that none of that's true. He's not suicidal at all, but this is what happens to people who are involved. He's very determined to make sure that these scientists are covered, that they're not going to have any recriminations against them, to try to keep them anonymous. But the scientists have already told Steve, that it basically comes back to being these things are a mixture, that the DNA, the genes were manipulated a long time ago. And so, again, the when we talk about the giants and things that are going on now, it's not just a wild shot in the dark. We're not just winging a dart at the dartboard. The science is actually backing it up, and the Bible is being proven to be once again true. And there's lots of other stuff as well that over, as we do more episodes, we'll get into. Steve doesn't trust these beings. That's why whenever they do the mind speak and they try to contact him, that he refuses to interact with them because he knows they're not of the Lord. And there are people who go out and have seances, not seances, but they have telepathic communications with these beings. And, as you might expect, there's people who see these as the furry forest friends that we could all learn from, and they're going to teach us how to protect the earth and to not litter, and, the whole, the stuff people just eat up. And so there's people out there that are almost worshiping these beings, and they go out and they they play flutes and whatnot, and they leave apples and they hold hands and sing kumbaya, and it's really kind of ridiculous. But Steve has some friends that do this, and he asked them, he's like, listen, do me a favor, when you're having your little channeling with these beings, ask them about Jesus Christ and what they think of him. And so the people said, okay. So they did. And the reaction they got was very aggressive. The beings did not want to hear that name. They reacted in a very agitated way, which told Steve a lot. He's like, that speaks volumes that they would behave that way, because that's they know that name is not for them. They're on the other team. And as we'll get into, and we can talk about, because like I said, there's lots of beings out there, whether it's the Greys or the forest giants, or any number of other entities that have been reported in fairly large numbers. And we haven't even mentioned some of the worst that even I wasn't aware of until just a few years ago. But these, again, it's all what the Bible talks about is being borne out, and it's in some way it's not scary, because one thing we've heard again and again from people is, and this is something too that is amazing, the name of Jesus works wonders when these people are confronted with these beings. There have been people who have been hunting, and these beings will come upon them and act threatening, and they'll invoke the name of Jesus, and the beings run off like they've had acid thrown on them. Well, that shouldn't be the case if these are just large monkeys. I can use the name of Jesus. I can pray, for protection from a dog, but if I rebuke a dog in the name of Jesus, it's not really going to have much of an effect. I'm probably still going to get, because I don't necessarily, I mean, I can ask the Lord, protect me from that dog, but the dog doesn't listen to the name of Jesus the way a demon does, or the way that the enemy's camp does. They're required to. We have authority over them.
Well, in my own instance, I talked about my story where I encountered something dark. I'm not ready to say it was a demon, but I never actually saw anything. But I invoked the name of Jesus, and I dismissed it from this, or rebuked it, and I told it to leave this place, my home, and never return. And I haven't had a problem since. So the fact that I could sit there and rebuke a demon and tell him to flee from my home, and I haven't had any problems since. And I don't think it's any coincidence that these things react the way they do to Jesus. I think you've mentioned it before. C.S. Lewis in the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, how the witch's army is made up of all these different beings. If I don't think it's a coincidence that you can use the name of Jesus to rebuke a demon, and that these things react the way they do to it, and have even fled from the name. To me, it all just points they're all on the same team. And you mentioned, what did you mention a minute ago? I knew I should have written it down.
I know I've had to start doing that too.
Yeah,
I had to start jotting down because I was running through so many.
I make my notes here. But another thing is, like, I've admitted that I'm skeptic. It's not going to take seeing to believe for me. I don't need to have an encounter with one of these things. I don't want to have an encounter with one of these things. But the fact that you had mentioned, don't dismiss it because you don't have all the information. So I'm in a phase where now it's like, I'm a little skeptical. I kind of want to believe. It kind of seems a little too fantastical, but with these stories, they all which is part of the evidence, which is part of the information. You listen to these channels, and the name of his channel is, I looked it up, is the facts by howtohunt.com. And that's the name of his YouTube channel. But I've started listening to him. I've started listening to some of these other ones. Another one I listen to that tells park ranger stories is Donovan Dredd on YouTube.
Oh yeah.
And these park ranger stories are wild to listen to as well, because they're out there in the wilderness. They're in the deep woods, and they see things and experience it. And like you said, they're told to be quiet by the government. But they're starting to come forward now, and it's funny how all of these stories basically have the same circumstances, the same way things happen each time. And it's funny how it's not just one little small area where a bunch of people could have gotten together and made up a story and be like, hey, let's spread this thing out. They're coming from all around the world. All over the world, people are having these encounters, and it's the same circumstances, the same, like, everything goes quiet. Everything is just very still. A feeling of dread comes over them. They smell something putrid, just absolutely disgusting. They don't even know how to describe it. It's almost, they say it's so pungent, it's like a dead body, but worse. The smell. And then they encounter these things. The coincidences, and it's no coincidence really in the stories and then the details, and they couldn't have all possibly gotten together and made all this stuff up unless these people on these channels are just writing these stories just to have a YouTube channel, just to have viewers and subscriptions and stuff, which I don't think that's the case at all. It's just the same circumstances in all of these stories lends credence to the fact that these things could possibly be out there. I don't think people from all around the world can make up the same exact circumstances surrounding their encounters with these beings. But that's just basically the point I wanted to make there about that, and being a skeptic and seeing these things that I'm still gathering evidence, I'm still compiling the data, but I'm not dismissing anything, because especially when we link it to the Bible and when we link it to the end of times, and like we've said in Revelation, it says the veil will be lifted and these creatures will be unleashed on the earth. That, to me, lends more credence than any story I've ever heard to these things actually existing.
Well, they're clearly being held back right now. There's no doubt that these, I'm like Steve. I always say I think it was probably around eyewitness number 2043 that I realized that, there's no way that all this is being made up. And it's not just that. There's, the evidence that's out there as far as the video evidence is extremely persuasive. The audio evidence is very persuasive. It's just, all of that is, like Steve said, that's, what's interesting about this is it does link itself so much to the faith, because a young Christian is still very much kind of focused on, does God exist or not? And then after he has interactions with the Lord and sees prayers answered over time, a Christian who's been a Christian for a while no longer wonders, does the Lord exist? It's just taken for granted. Yeah, of course. I mean, I've experienced the Lord so many times, I'd have to be crazy. But yet for the lost and the non-Christian, they still, very much are wondering, and that's understandable. We've all been there, and I still remember how exciting it was to pray and to realize the Lord was hearing. The Lord listens to your prayers and answers them. And this is not exactly the same, because we're encouraging folks to not have interactions with these things. Unfortunately, there's people all over the country that are having interactions with these beings, and it's really making a nightmare out of life for a lot of people. They just want it to stop, and they don't want to be harassed anymore. Other people live out in the woods and don't have any problem. Other people, big game hunters, have never had any interaction. We don't know why some people do and some people don't. But what's clear is that there are people that for some reason they're tapped and they have interactions, and no matter where they go, they have interactions with these things. There's other people that their interactions only start after they've done certain things. Like where Scott Carpenter is when he started pursuing, he was bass fishing on a lake and had seen the Bigfoot show and thought it was funny and decided he would do a whoop, real loud, sound. So he did, and something basically walked down to the bank in a cove that he was in. He couldn't see it, but he knew it was huge, and that started his journey. And so it's the reason why we bring all this up is because it's very much a part of our world. And Jesus said, as it was in the days of Noah. And Jesus also said that men's hearts will fail them from fear of what is coming upon the earth. And even non-Christians feel like these sightings are increasing a great deal. It seems like there's more people out in the country that are having interactions with these beings and they don't want them. They don't want to be harassed. But see, these beings, these squatches, these forest giants, whatever, they are attracted to people because that's what the watchers, their fathers, the angels were designed to be fascinated. The Bible says that angels long to look into human affairs. And so they're amazed by us. They're interested in us. And these beings have a part of that in them. And so they're not always attacking people. At times they're just they're staring at people and they're looking and they're observing. And being that these creatures where the science suggests they're half human, you get all the wide range of traits that humans have. Some of these beings seem to be murderous and evil. Others, we know for a fact, have saved people's lives. So it's not 100% cut and dry. I do recommend that people stay away from going out and pursuing these things, but it's not something where we're not trying to scare people on here. It's not something to where if you have woods around your house, you automatically need to live in fear. For one thing, like we said, the name of Jesus seems to strike fear into them. And even some of the Indians, the First Nations people that write into Steve's show have said that these beings have an aversion to people who are close to Jesus. They don't want anything to do with people which is fine with me. I feel the same. And and Scott Carpenter has basically been able to keep them at arm's length. They don't interact with him. They're always at a distance because they know that he knows. So the veil is down. So when he goes hiking, even now, he still has his camera on his back. He's not out there looking for him, but he does mount the camera and he still gets pictures of them, but they don't come in his yard anymore. He prayed a hedge of protection and whatnot. And one of his ministries now is he goes to ranches and farms where people are being harassed by these things and having their stuff taken and, having things, having their cattle killed and whatnot. And he goes and helps people deal with these beings and to try to live peaceably with these woods people. That's what they are. They're not animals at all. They're wild men is what they are. And that's the best description. And I think in another episode, we'll get into the theory as to how they got in the state that they're in now, because they clearly have fallen from what they were in the days of Noah and even afterward, when these giants ran the show. I mean, they built the pyramids. They did a lot of, people worshiped them. You look at Egyptian hieroglyphs and they clearly show giants lording over the peoples. And so how did they go from that to being mistaken for large bipedal gorillas wandering around? Something happened, and it did. And that's probably a good subject for another episode. There's so many things that we've just scratched the surface with tonight. The evidence for all this, and if you're not interested, you're not interested. But it doesn't change the fact that it's out there and it's happening, and the government's aware of it. People, like I said, people have gone missing. And these are actual, that's part of this whole thing. The missing 411 is directly linked to the cryptids. I'm not saying that all of them are taken by forest giants. I'm not saying that they're all taken by UFOs, but there is no doubt that something is preying upon mankind. And it's not good. It's not angels, and it's not Jesus, and it's not the Holy Spirit. Something is taking people. We have hundreds of people, if not thousands, that we know that have vanished inexplicably under the most bizarre circumstance. They're gone. their families have had to move on and live without them. These people went out into the national park thinking they were going hiking and simply vanished. And sometimes they find the bones where looks like they've been torn apart. And I don't want to get to the 411. That's a whole other episode. But it's serious stuff. And like you said with the veil, I'm convinced, I'm utterly convinced that these beings right now, they're being held back, but there will come a time when they're no longer required to see. Right now they have to hide. That's the rules that the Lord set forth. They are not allowed to come out into the open and reveal themselves. That's why they're so secretive, because once they do, the supernatural will be unveiled. And right now, the Lord has said that the supernatural will be veiled. It will not be visible to everyone. The only people that interact with the supernatural are those that pursue it, whether it's people like you and I who pursue the Holy Spirit and Jesus, and we seek after a relationship with the Lord, or whether it's people who have Ouija boards and seances and have telepathic communication out in the woods with these beings. We're all pursuing the supernatural. It's just, are you pursuing evil, or are you pursuing righteousness? And right now you have to pursue, because these things are hidden behind that veil. But there will come a time when that veil is no longer, and I'm convinced it's right after the church is taken, or sometime very soon thereafter. And like I said, when Jesus said that men's hearts will fail them for fear of what is coming upon the earth, when these beings begin kicking in doors and dragging people off into the woods, never to be seen again, it's not going to be a pretty scene. And they're fully capable of doing it. They've already done it in some cases. We have accounts where they've done this. It's very rare. It's far between. Many of the incidences seem to be where people have fed these things thinking they were being friends, and then when they stopped feeding, these beings didn't understand. They didn't even know, what do you mean you're not going to feed us anymore? And so that ended in disaster for the humans, because like Scott Carpenter says, these beings are not bound by our laws. I mean, they can kill somebody off in the woods and bury them under a tree trunk and nobody will ever know. And if anyone finds out, the government's going to cover it up. And so if it's too much for a lot of people, then it's best to just ignore it. If you live in the middle of the city, for the most part, you can ignore it. You have other problems to deal with in the city. You don't really have to, look into these things. I live out in a rural area. I'm not the least bit afraid. I go out I go back in the woods and whatnot, do what I need to do. They're not going to bother me. I'm not going to live in fear. But I don't go out there knocking on trees or anything. I did 2 years ago. I was fishing in April of 2020. And for the first time ever, on a lake behind our house, I was fishing along the bank and heard a tree knock. And there was nobody. It was an area where there was no people. And it was pretty close by. And it was definitely a tree knock. It was not the tree. There was no wind or anything like that. It was a tree knock. And I just kept right on fishing. I didn't pursue it or anything. And it was across the lake from where I live. And my son and his friend went over there several months later and found all sorts of strange tree structures and stuff back there, where trees had been bent over, made strange structures and stuff like they do. They do weird stuff like that. But we can get into all that in later episodes. But I mean, this was a good, and I think this was a great start. We kind of dove in, but like I said, we wanted to bring this stuff out and then go back later with some of the more detailed information, because if you start with the tiny details, you're going to lose people, and they need to know what it is we're talking about. And right. Then if they want to come back for more, then because there's going to be a lot more.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
This episode is running pretty long, so I think that's a good place to stop it. I remembered what I was going to say earlier. You were talking about these beings out there and the different types of beings that are out there. And if you notice in the video, you can see me smiling and nodding, and I got that little sheepish, devilish smile on my face because I know exactly which one you're talking about, and I think you intentionally avoided mentioning it in this episode, and I will too. But yeah, there's other ones other than Bigfoot out there that people are talking about. And it's just you know exactly which one I'm talking about now, don't you? Because I knew which one you were referencing. Yeah. But yeah, we'll get into that one in maybe part 2 or 3 or 4 or part 19, because I feel like this is gonna extend over a lot of episodes, but yeah, that's what I remembered. If you see me smiling during this video and you see me smiling with a devilish smile on my face, I knew exactly which one you were referring to. And yeah, I won't mention it because I know you didn't mention them on purpose, because if Bigfoot's going to throw, or Sasquatch or whatever you want to call it, it's going to turn people away, I know that one definitely will. So
for sure.
But anyway, I think that's a good place to stop for tonight. We will definitely be getting into more of this in part 2. But yeah, a lot of, what's going to bring me around to believing it's not going to be, the stories that people send in. I mean, they're very compelling and they draw my attention and make me want to believe, but it's going to be the fact that I'm a Christian, and linking these things to the enemy and linking them to the veil and the end of days and to the giants in the Bible. That's going to be what brings me around and makes me, a true believer, and instead of just being skeptical. But, that's the main thing we want to do is to focus on that when we're talking about this stuff, and to definitely, because we are Christians, this is a Christian channel, right. And we just want to keep that major theme going. But linking them to the giants and stuff, that's definitely going to be probably what brings me around. But,
and we never want to get away from that.
Right.
Exactly. We never want to get away from Lincoln. It's never going to be a channel just about cryptids. It's always going to be grounded in how do we look at this in relation to, where we are as the church and what's been going on in this world for 4,000 years.
Right. And I don't think we did that tonight. I just wanted to make sure to make that point, before we sign off. But
right.
We didn't start this channel to make money. We didn't start this channel to get as many subscribers as possible, to monetize this channel. We felt compelled by the Lord to start this channel to spread his message, what he gives us to talk about. And we feel like, a lot of people, especially Christians, don't want to touch this subject. And it's one of the reasons why we definitely wanted to touch this subject. But, if you want to subscribe, that'd be great. We'd love to have you, but we're not looking to get 1 million subscribers, 2 million subscribers, as many as possible. We just want to spread the Lord's message. If we can just get one person to dedicate or rededicate their lives to the Lord, then we've done our job. But yeah, we're definitely going to be getting into some interesting subjects like we did tonight, and I think we're going to expand on that one next time in part 2. So be sure to join us for that, because it's only going to get weirder. Was there anything else, Jerry, you wanted to add before we
Nope.
We'll sign off? All right. Well,
sleep tight.
Yeah. Right. If you're listening to this late at night, good luck. All right. Well, that's going to do it for us this time. We'll see you next time. God bless.